The bottom drawer of Evelyn Bennett's nightstand had been locked for as long as Laura could remember. 3 days after the funeral, Laura noticed the keyhole for the first time. She was 42, exhausted, and halfway through sorting the small Vermont house where she had grown up. The bedroom curtains still carried the faint floral perfume Evelyn had worn every Sunday of Laura's childhood. Laura had already packed the reading glasses, the crossword book, and the nearly empty tube of hand cream. She had labeled 3 boxes keep, donate, and trash. The locked drawer did not fit any of them. She tried the handle twice, then sat back on her heels. In a house this small, secrets had always seemed impossible. Laura went to the kitchen, found a flat screwdriver in the junk drawer, and worked carefully at the old lock. It gave with a dry click. Inside was a shoebox beneath a stack of holiday cards. The box held 2 envelopes and a brass key. One envelope looked recent, addressed to Laura in handwriting she did not know. The other had yellowed at the edges and carried a postmark more than 20 years old. Both had her first name on the front. Laura opened the newer one. Inside was a single index card with an address in northern New Hampshire. There was no explanation, only the address and a line beneath it, "Bring the brass key." The older envelope remained sealed in her lap. She turned it over and saw that it had once been mailed to this house. Someone had received it, hidden it, and kept it for more than 2 decades. Laura called her brother before she could talk herself out of it. Mark Bennett answered from his home office on the second ring. "I found something in Mom's bedroom," Laura said. "A locked drawer, 2 letters, a key, and an address in New Hampshire." Mark went quiet. It was not a long silence, but Laura knew him well enough to hear effort inside it. "Throw them out," he said. Laura looked down at the old envelope. "Why?" "Because Mom saved everything. Half the house is paper she should have tossed years ago. The letters are addressed to me." Another pause. "Laura, you just buried her. You don't need some stranger dragging you into something now." His voice had become careful, almost professional. Mark sold real estate, and Laura had heard that same calm tone when buyers were about to walk away from a deal. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. "No." The answer came too quickly. Laura waited. Mark added, "Just leave it alone." "Okay," she said. She hung up without promising anything. The brass key went into her coat pocket. The old letter went into her purse, still unopened. Laura stood at the kitchen window and looked at Evelyn's neglected garden. Her mother had been too sick to tend it that summer. Laura had kept thinking there would be one more weekend to come up and help. There had not been. She refused to let that regret decide what she did next. The following morning, Laura called in personal leave from Maple Ridge Elementary. She told no one where she was going. Her 15-year-old son Owen was already at school when she left. Mark received no message at all. The drive north took almost 3 hours through low mountains and towns thinning into forest. The address led her to a narrow brick building off the main road in a town called Ashford Crossing. A brass plaque beside the door read Pierce Legal Group. The office inside was quieter and smaller than the name suggested. An older receptionist looked up when Laura entered. "You're Laura Bennett." Laura stopped beside the door. "Yes. Mr. Pierce asked me to send you straight in if you came." "If I c—" The woman gave her a sympathetic look. "He said you might." Nolan Pierce was standing beside his office window when Laura entered. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, and dressed like a man who had stopped caring whether his suit looked expensive. He did not seem surprised to see her. "Ms. Bennett," he said. "Thank you for coming." Laura stayed standing. "You knew I was coming before I did. I knew someone hoped you would." He motioned toward the chair across from his desk. Laura sat because her knees suddenly felt less reliable than they had in the parking lot. Pierce placed a thick manila envelope between them. Her name was typed on the front. "Who sent the key?" Laura asked. "Your biological father arranged for it to reach you." The phrase seemed to arrive from outside the room. Laura stared at him. "My father died when I was 7. "The man who raised you died when you were 7, Pierce said gently. Laura's fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. "What are you saying?" "His name was James Mercer." Pierce paused before continuing. "He died 8 months ago at 67. Laura waited for the name to mean something. It did not. Pierce told her James had built a regional construction company, then invested heavily in commercial property. He had been Pierce's client for nearly 30 years. "He left instructions concerning you," Pierce said. Laura heard the words but focused on the water glass near his elbow. A tiny bead of condensation moved slowly down the side. "Why would a stranger leave instructions about me?" Pierce did not look away. "Because he was your father." Laura's palm came down flat on the desk. She needed to feel something solid. "You're telling me my whole life is wrong." "No," Pierce said. "I'm telling you there is a part of it you were never given." The distinction made her angry because it sounded reasonable. She did not want reasonable yet. Pierce pushed the manila envelope toward her, but did not make her take it. James owned a house about 20 minutes from here, he said. The front door is managed by the estate. There is also a locked room upstairs. Laura touched the brass key through the fabric of her coat pocket. Pierce noticed. That key opens the room. How did it get into my mother's drawer? James left it with instructions that it be passed to you after his death. Through Evelyn. Through your mother, Pierce said. Laura flinched at the word but did not correct him. He knew Evelyn Bennett had raised you, he said. He also knew she might be the only person you would trust enough to keep something like that. Laura almost laughed. Trust was not the word she would have chosen at that moment. What is in the envelope? A letter from James photographs a second key, preliminary estate information. State. Pierce folded his hands. James left most of what he owned to you. Laura stared at him long enough that the traffic outside became noticeable again. How much? You do not have to discuss that today. I asked how much. Close to $130 million before final administration. Laura leaned back. The number was too large to feel like money. It felt like weather or distance or another fact belonging to someone else's life. I teach 4th grade, she said. Pierce nodded once. I know. That frightened her more than the number. How do you know? James knew. Laura looked at the envelope again. What did he want from me? Nothing while he was alive. Pierce's answer came without hesitation. He believed he had already lost the right to ask. Laura stood. I need to leave. Of course. She picked up the envelope. At the door she turned back. Was he a good man? Pierce considered the question instead of protecting his client with an easy answer. He was disciplined, private, and stubborn, he said. He could mistake restraint for virtue. But where you were concerned, he tried very hard not to take what he believed was not his. Laura left with more questions than she had brought in. The manila envelope rode home on the passenger seat. The older sealed letter stayed in her purse. She did not turn on the radio once. By the time Laura reached home, the October light had turned thin and gray. She set the manila envelope on the kitchen table and avoided it for 2 hours. She wiped a clean counter. She reorganized a drawer that did not need organizing. She filled the kettle, forgot it, poured the water out, and started again. At 4:15, Owen came through the front door with one shoelace untied and his backpack hanging from one shoulder. He dropped the backpack by the bench exactly where Laura had asked him not to drop it for the past 3 years. Then he walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and looked at her face. Owen had always been good at noticing what people were trying not to announce. He took an apple and sat across from her. His eyes moved once to the envelope. He waited. Laura sat down. Grandma kept something from me. Owen lowered the apple. Something bad? I don't know yet. Something about you? Yes. He nodded slowly. Laura watched him look at the manila envelope, then at her purse hanging over the chair. Does Uncle Mark know? I think he knows part of it. But he didn't tell you. No. Owen took another bite of the apple. After a moment he picked up his chair and moved it beside hers. He did not hug her or tell her everything would be fine. He simply sat close enough that she no longer felt alone at the table. Laura rested her hands in her lap. I found out today that the man I thought was my father wasn't my biological father. Owen stopped chewing. Laura continued before she lost the nerve. There was another man. His name was James Mercer. What? He died 8 months ago. Owen's eyes stayed on her. He left me a house. She swallowed. And a lot of money. How much is a lot? Enough that I don't know what the number means yet. Owen accepted that answer. Then he asked the question Laura had not let herself form in the car. Did he know about you? Yes. How much? I don't know. That night the envelopes remained unopened. Laura slept badly and woke before dawn. She made Owen's lunch by habit, turkey and cheese, with the crusts cut off because some arguments were not worth winning. When the front door closed behind him at 7:15, the house changed shape around the silence. Laura sat at the kitchen table. She placed the old sealed letter on her left and James Mercer's manila envelope on her right. Then she opened the manila envelope first. Inside was a 4-page handwritten letter, a stack of photographs, and a smaller key marked with a simple metal tag. The tag read only upstairs room. Laura set the key beside the brass one. She picked up the handwritten letter. The first line used her name without claiming intimacy. James wrote that if she was reading his words, someone had finally told her the truth he had spent most of his life carrying alone. He told her that her birth mother's name was Hannah Avery. Hannah had been 22 when Laura was born. She died less than a day later from a rare childbirth complication. Laura stopped reading. For 42 years, she had never known there was a name missing from her life. Now there it was in blue ink on cream paper. Hannah Avery. She said it once under her breath. Then she kept reading. James wrote that he had been 24, unmarried, and unprepared for how quickly grief could become paperwork. Hannah's parents were already dead, and she had no brothers or sisters who could take the baby. James had no nearby family, no permanent home, and a construction job that sent him from site to site. County Child Welfare placed Laura temporarily with an approved foster family while he tried to establish a workable plan. He spent weeks looking for housing, childcare, and a way to keep earning enough to support an infant alone. The Bennett family had already been caring for Laura during that period. Evelyn and Robert Bennett had a 3-year-old son, Mark, a modest house, and the kind of stability the caseworkers could point to on paper. James wrote that nobody physically forced his hand. That mattered to him. He had been frightened, grieving, and convinced that loving Laura meant choosing the home that looked safer than the life he could offer. He signed a voluntary relinquishment that allowed the Bennetts to adopt her. Afterward, he sat in a grocery store parking lot until dark because he could not make himself drive anywhere else. Laura lowered the letter. She had spent her childhood believing Robert Bennett was her biological father. He had died in a highway accident when she was 7. Every story Evelyn told afterward had begun with the assumption that there was nothing else to explain. Laura picked up James's letter again. He wrote that the adoption ended his legal role in her life. It did not end his need to know whether she was safe. At first, he asked Pierce only to confirm that the placement remained stable. Later, he learned what he could from public things: school program, yearbook, local newspaper, graduation list, community announcements. He attended a few public events from far enough away that Laura would never be forced into an encounter she had not chosen. James admitted that there were times he stood in parking lots and hated himself for being relieved simply to see her walk through a door. He also admitted that distance could become an excuse. The longer he stayed away, the more impossible it felt to appear without doing damage. Laura looked at the stack of photographs. There were 31. The first showed a small girl crossing a playground with a red coat open at the front. Laura recognized Evelyn in the background. Younger than Laura could remember her. The next was a school picture reproduced from a yearbook page. Laura was missing one front tooth. Another showed her outside her high school on the first morning of freshman year. She remembered the striped sweater she had worn until one sleeve tore at the elbow. There was a photograph from her college graduation, taken from behind rows of folding chairs. There was one from her wedding, outside a small church, when she had still believed that marriage was a promise two people automatically knew how to keep. There was a newspaper clipping announcing Owen's birth. There was a school district newsletter from Laura's first year as a teacher. There was a local photograph from the year she received a county teaching award. James had not captured every year with a camera. He had gathered traces wherever her life became visible to the public. Together they formed a second version of Laura's history. Not the life she had lived, but the evidence that someone outside it had been paying attention. The last photograph showed Laura outside Maple Ridge Elementary at the start of the school year. She was laughing at something a student had said. Laura stared at the image until her eyes blurred. Her phone rang. Mark's name lit the screen. She let it ring out. A minute later, he called again. Laura answered. "Did you go to New Hampshire?" Mark asked. There was no greeting. "Yes." "You saw Pierce. You know who he is." Mark exhaled. "Mom told me years ago there was a lawyer connected to the man who gave you up. The man who gave me up has a name. I know that now. Did you know it before today?" Mark hesitated. "James Mercer." Laura closed her eyes. "So you knew?" "I knew there had been someone. Mom said he was unstable when you were born." "What does unstable mean?" "She said he had no home, no family support, no way to raise a baby." "That part is true." "Then you understand why she was careful." "Careful about what?" "About protecting you." Laura looked at the photographs spread across the table. "From knowing I was adopted." Mark's voice tightened. "The Bennetts are your family. Robert was your dad, Mom was your mom. None of that becomes fake because somebody else existed first." "I didn't say it was fake." The answer seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. Laura continued, "I said I should have known." Mark was quiet. Then he asked, "What did Mercer want?" "He's dead." "I know, I mean, what did he leave?" Laura heard the shift immediately. "A house, a letter, and money." "Yes." "How much?" "Enough that I'm not discussing the number with you right now." Mark lowered his voice. "Laura, I'm not trying to get into your business. You called me before I had coffee to ask if I went to a lawyer you already knew about, because I was worried." "I know." She believed him. That was what made the conversation harder. Fear could be sincere and still lead people somewhere harmful. Mark said Mom was terrified that if you found out you'd stop seeing us as your family. Laura traced one finger along the edge of the oldest photograph. Did she know my birth mother's name? Mark did not answer. Mark, I don't know. Did you? No. Did either of you ever try to find out? The silence changed. For the first time, Mark had no prepared defense. Laura said her name was Hannah Avery. Mark breathed in but said nothing. She was 22. She died the day I was born. I didn't know. I know you didn't. Laura set the phone on the table without ending the call. She did not want to slam a door she might later need to open. From the speaker, she could hear Mark breathing. Laura picked up the photograph of herself at 15. Somewhere beyond that frame, James Mercer had known Hannah's name. The family who raised Laura had loved her fiercely. They had also been so afraid of losing her that they never asked what knowledge belonged to her. Both things were true. Laura did not yet know how to carry both. 4 days later, Laura drove back to New Hampshire with Owen beside her. He had asked to come without making a speech about it. "Can I go with you?" was all he said. Laura said. They spent most of the drive in a silence that did not feel empty. The Mercer house stood at the end of a gravel road outside Ashford Crossing. It was a weathered 2-story place with an old porch and a broad yard edging into pine woods. The paint had faded from white toward cream. A garden along one side had been cut back neatly for fall. The mailbox still carried James Mercer's name. Laura stood beside it longer than she intended. She had been saying his name to herself for 4 days. It still sounded like information rather than family. Pierce had left a front door key with his receptionist and a note telling Laura to take whatever time she needed. Laura opened the door. Cold air met them first. The house had been closed through the change of seasons, and the warmth had drained from the walls. The living room smelled faintly of old paper and wood smoke. Books filled 2 built-in walls. Laura ran her eyes over history, architecture, forestry, and regional geology. Nearly every volume she checked carried pencil notes in a small, deliberate hand, questions in the margins, a date beside a paragraph, an occasional underlined sentence with no comment at all. The kitchen was clean enough to look recently abandoned rather than neglected. One mug sat upside down on the drying rack. A dish towel hung folded evenly over the oven handle. In the living room, a deep green chair faced a window over the garden. The wooden arm on the right side had been polished smooth by years of use. Laura rested her fingers there. A man she had never met had spent thousands of evenings in this room. "Mom," Owen said quietly. He stood near the far wall. Laura joined him. Between the bookshelves hung a road map of Vermont and New Hampshire mounted on stiff backing. Several highways were traced in pencil. One small Vermont town was circled in faded red ink. Alder Glen. Laura felt the room narrow around that name. Alder Glen was where she had taught for 17 years. It was where Owen had learned to ride a bike and broken his wrist trying to jump a curb. It was where Laura had bought a small cape after her divorce and spent 2 summers fixing the roof a little at a time. The red circle had faded almost brown. It had been there for years. Owen looked from the map to his mother. Then he stepped back and turned toward the bookshelves. Laura understood what he was doing. He was giving her privacy without leaving her alone. She stayed in front of the map until she could breathe normally again. James had known where she lived. He had also stayed away. Laura was not ready to decide whether that was noble, cowardly, or both. At the back of the hall, they found the stairs. The second floor held a plain bedroom and one closed door. The closed door had no knob, only a keyhole set into a brass plate. Laura took out the smaller key marked upstairs room. Her hand paused before the lock. Owen stood 1 step behind her. "I'm here," he said. Laura turned the key. The room was small. For 1 second, she could not understand what she was seeing. Then she did. The walls were covered with her life. Not private photographs stolen through windows or anything that made her recoil. These were newspaper clippings, school newsletters, graduation programs, public award notices, and copied pages from old yearbook. Everything had been arranged in careful chronological rows. A feature from the Alder Glen Record showed Laura helping children plant a school garden. A district newsletter announced her first teaching assignment. A county education bulletin listed her name among award recipients. A clipping marked Owen's birth. A photograph from a public graduation ceremony showed Laura in a cap and gown, half turned away from the camera. There were gaps, entire stretches of years represented by only 1 page or 1 note. Those gaps made the room feel more truthful. James had not possessed her life. He had collected the moments that reached him. Owen moved into the doorway beside her. "He kept all this." Laura nodded. Her throat had tightened too much for speech. A small desk stood under the window. On it were a lamp, a cup of pencils, and a cloth-bound notebook. Laura sat in the wooden chair and opened the notebook. The earliest entries were almost painfully formal. Laura Bennett, age 2. Daycare placement appears stable. No reported concern. Later entries mentioned the public elementary school she attended, the names of teachers printed in school programs, and the dates of performances listed in local papers. James recorded facts as if facts were safer than feelings. For years, they probably had been. Then the tone began to change. One entry from Laura's early teens noted a yearbook photograph. She has Hannah's smile, James had written. Not the shape of it, the way it arrives all at once. Laura put one hand over the page. She had known Hannah Avery's name for 4 days. James had carried it for 4 decades. She turned ahead. College entry mentioned that Laura had chosen elementary education. He wrote that Hannah had once talked about becoming a teacher before her own life went in another direction. Another entry years later noted Laura's divorce, only because the local property record showed her buying a small house alone. I hope she has help, James wrote. 2 lines later, in different pressure from the pencil, he added, she has always learned how to make a life with what is available. Laura read that sentence twice. Owen was behind her, close enough to read but not leaning over her shoulder. The entry about his birth was brief. Owen Bennett, born in late October. Local announcement says mother and child are healthy. Then below it she looks exhausted in the photograph and happier than I have ever seen her. Laura laughed once through the pressure in her chest. Owen smiled but said nothing. Near the end of the notebook, James wrote about Laura's County Teaching Award. He had driven to Alder Glen for the public ceremony. He remained in his car because the event required school invitations for indoor seating. From the parking lot, he heard applause through an open gymnasium door when Laura's name was announced. That was enough, he wrote. Then he crossed out enough and wrote more than I deserved. Laura turned to the last page. The handwriting had become slower. James wrote that he did not know whether Laura would ever come to the house. He did not know whether she would want the truth once it was offered. He had left the choice with Pierce because he no longer trusted himself to decide what Laura should know. The estate, he wrote, was not an apology and not a purchase price for forgiveness. It was simply the only part of his life he still had the legal power to give her. Then came the sentence Laura could not move past. I watched you become a good mother and a good teacher, and I was proud of you without having any right to expect you to care. Below that he had added one final line. I noticed the life you built, even when you had no reason to believe I was there. Laura lowered the notebook. She had been crying without realizing when it began. Owen reached forward and closed the notebook gently after she let go of it. He aligned it with the edge of the desk, exactly as they had found it. Laura looked at him. He did not ask if she was okay. That question would have required her to pretend there was a usable answer. Instead, Owen sat on the floor beside the desk. Laura rested one hand on his shoulder. The room grew darker around them as the afternoon moved on. At 4, tires sounded on the gravel below. Pierce arrived carrying another envelope. Laura met him in the kitchen. Owen had found tea and set 3 mugs on the table. Pierce accepted one with a small nod. I used to have dinner here once a month, he said. Laura glanced toward the living room. You were his friend. I was his lawyer first. Pierce looked into the mug. Eventually, he set the envelope on the table. James wanted you to see the upstairs room before I gave you the final estate accounting. Why? He thought numbers would make him look like something he wasn't. A rich man. A man trying to buy his way into your life. Laura sat down. The room doesn't exactly make this simple. No, Pierce said. He wasn't expecting simple. Laura remembered the old envelope still sealed in her purse. She took it out and placed it beside the newer papers. Do you know what this is? Pierce recognized it immediately. His face changed in a way Laura had not seen before. Yes. Laura's hand stayed on the envelope. Tell me before I open it. Pierce nodded. James mailed that to you when you were 19. Owen looked at his mother. Laura did not move. Pierce continued carefully. You were in your first year of college. James decided you were old enough to make your own choice about knowing him. He wrote to me. Yes. And Mom kept. Yes. Laura looked at the postmark again. She remembered being 19 with a clarity that surprised her. She had called Evelyn every Sunday that year. She had complained about cafeteria food, worried about tuition, and declared an education major after 1 month. She had also carried a private feeling that something in her life was missing. She had never known what question to attach to it. A possible answer had been sitting in Evelyn's locked drawer. Did James know she kept it? No. Pierce's voice was quiet. He waited 6 months for an answer. Laura looked up. What did he think? That you had received it and chosen not to respond. And he just accepted that. He believed acceptance was the only right he had left. Laura felt anger rise so quickly it made her hands cold. He could have tried again. He could have. Pierce did not defend him. He was afraid that a second attempt would turn respect into pressure. So he decided for me too. In a different way, Pierce said yes. Laura looked at him sharply. The answer hurt because it refused to make James innocent. Pierce went on. Evelyn did not destroy the letter. She kept it sealed. I don't know whether that was guilt, fear, or some hope that she would eventually give it to you. Did Mark know? Not about the letter. Laura exhaled slowly. She did that alone. As far as James and I ever knew. Laura opened the envelope. The letter inside was only one page. The handwriting was the same as the notebook, younger and more forceful. James introduced himself as the man who had signed away his parental rights when Laura was an infant. He did not ask her to call him Dad. He did not ask for forgiveness. He gave her Pierce's office number and wrote that if she wanted no contact, he would treat silence as her answer. He promised there would be no second letter. Laura read the last sentence again. The promise had sounded respectful when James wrote it. After 23 years in a locked drawer, it looked tragic. Evelyn's fear and James's restraint had met in the same place. Laura had lived inside the silence they created without knowing either of them had made it. Pierce slid the final estate packet toward her. The financial summary valued James's holdings at just under $130 million. There were commercial properties, investment accounts, and his remaining interest in the construction company he had sold years earlier. The house transferred to Laura outside the business assets. Pierce explained only what she needed to understand that day. James had spent years simplifying ownership and documenting the estate so Laura would not inherit a maze of disputes. There were taxes and administrative work ahead, but no hidden contest and no one else claiming the core assets. Laura listened without absorbing the scale. Did he ever talk about me, she asked. Pierce leaned back. Sometime. What did he say? Usually something ordinary. Pierce smiled faintly. He'd mentioned that your school won a grant, or that you were quoted in the local paper, or that Owen made an honor roll list. That was it? That was most of it. Pierce thought for a moment. He always looked settled afterward. Not happy exactly. More like a man checking that something important was still standing. Laura looked through the kitchen doorway toward the old green chair. Did he regret giving me up? Every day. Did he think it was the wrong decision? Pierce took his time. I think he believed it was the least bad decision available to the man he was then. Laura appreciated that answer more than comfort would have helped. He became wealthy later, Pierce said. That made the past look solvable when it wasn't. Money couldn't go backward. No, it can only arrive late. Pierce nodded. Before leaving, he stood on the porch and told Laura he would wait in his car while she decided whether she needed anything else. She watched him walk down the steps. Then she returned to the kitchen table. Owen had not touched the estate packet. He was looking at the old letter. So Grandma stopped him from finding you, he said. Laura shook her head slowly. She stopped one letter. Owen frowned. Isn't that the same thing? No. Laura looked toward the stairs. He chose not to try again. She chose not to give me the letter. They both made choices for me because they were afraid of what their own choice might cause. Owen considered that. Are you mad at her? Yes. The answer came cleanly. Laura added, and I still love her. Owen nodded. Both. Laura reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The October light was fading beyond the kitchen window. For most of her life, family had felt like a settled fact. Now it felt more like a history made of decisions, some generous and some frightened, all leaving consequences behind. 3 days later, Laura called Mark. I want you to come to the house, she said. There was a pause. Mercer's house. James's house. Mark corrected himself. James's house. Saturday morning. I'll be there. He arrived 5 minutes before 10. That was so exactly like Mark that Laura nearly smiled. She watched from the kitchen window as he got out of his car and stood in the yard. For the first time, Mark looked uncertain about whether he belonged somewhere Laura did. She opened the front door before he knocked. They sat across from each other at James Mercer's kitchen table. Laura had learned how to use the old percolator that morning. Mark wrapped both hands around his coffee. I didn't know about the letter, he said. I know. Pierce told you. Yes. Mark stared into the mug. Mom never told me she kept anything from him. I thought she warned him off, and that was the end of it. She kept his letter to me for 23 years. Mark closed his eyes briefly. I've been thinking about her all week. Laura waited. I think she was terrified from the day you came into the house, he said, Zget. Not of you losing you. Laura said nothing. Mark continued. She loved you so much that she made herself the judge of what you were allowed to know. His voice broke slightly on the last words. And she knew better. I think that's why she kept the letter instead of destroying it. Laura looked at her brother. That doesn't make it okay. I know. He did not ask her to soften it. That mattered. Mark rubbed one thumb along the rim of the mug. I also knew there was a biological father. I knew Mom didn't want you asking questions. You went along with it. Yes. Why? Because it was easier. The honesty surprised both of them. Mark looked up. And because I was scared too. Of what? That you'd decide we weren't your family. Laura leaned back. Did you really think a name could erase 40 years? No, Mark swallowed. I think I was afraid to find out. Laura let that sit between them. She had spent days wanting someone to give her a clean villain. Instead, she had a dead mother who had loved her and denied her information. A dead father who had respected a silence that was never hers. A brother who had protected the family story because he was afraid the truth might change his place inside it. Love was present in every choice. So was. That did not make the harm disappear. It made the harm harder to sort. Mark glanced around the kitchen. What are you going to do with all this? The house, the money, everything. Laura had thought about little else since Pierce left. I'm keeping the house for now. Mark nodded. And the estate? I don't know yet. She looked through the window toward the fall garden. James spent his life paying attention from a distance. Mark waited. I think some of the money should help people who don't have anybody paying attention at all. Kids? Maybe. Families, teachers. I need time before I turn an idea into a promise. Mark nodded again. That sounds like you. Laura looked at him sharply, but there was no claim hidden in the sentence. Just recognition. Mark took a breath. I'm sorry. Laura said nothing. For knowing enough to ask questions and not asking them, he continued. For defending Mom before I even understood what she'd done. His eyes dropped. And for calling you like I had any right to tell you what to do with the key. Laura did not tell him it was fine. It was not fun. I understand why you were afraid, she said. Mark looked up. That's not forgiveness. I know. And it doesn't mean we're done talking about this. I know. Laura felt some tightness inside her ease because he had finally stopped negotiating for an outcome. He was accepting what she actually offered. Mark left near noon. At the door he opened his arms and waited instead of assuming. Laura stepped into the hug. She let him hold her for a moment. Call me when you want to, he said. I will. She watched his car disappear down the gravel road. Then she went back inside. Owen was upstairs somewhere, quiet but present. Laura climbed the stairs and returned to the small room at the end of the hall. She stood among the clippings and programs and photographs James had saved. For the first time, the room did not feel like a revelation. It felt like evidence of a life already lived. Her life had not become more valuable because a wealthy man had watched it. Her work had mattered before she knew he had noticed. Her motherhood had mattered before she knew he had kept the birth announcement. Her choices were still hers. What had changed was the number of people contained in her history. Laura crossed to the window. The sash stuck at first. She pushed harder and cold air entered the room. It smelled of pine, damp earth and the coming frost. The papers on the wall lifted slightly at the corners. Laura looked toward the blue line of mountains beyond the field. Then she spoke the name she had been given too late. Hannah Avery. The room held it. Laura said it again. Not for James, who had remembered Hannah all those years. Not for Evelyn, who had feared what the name might change. Not for Mark or Owen. For herself. Hannah Avery had been 22 years old. She had existed before becoming a missing piece in someone else's story. Laura could not recover a conversation with her. She could not recover the letter James believed she had rejected. She could not give James back the years he spent interpreting silence as a boundary. And she could not turn Evelyn into only the worst decision Evelyn had made. What Laura could do was refuse to continue the same pattern. She could stop treating love as permission to decide what another person was allowed to know. She could let anger exist without using it to erase care. She could let gratitude exist without using it to cancel harm. The inheritance would change practical things in Laura's life, but it could not settle those questions for her. Money could fund choices. It could not make an old choice right. James had learned too late that restraint can become another form of decision when the other person never gets a voice. Evelyn had learned, perhaps without ever admitting it aloud, that protection can become control when fear chooses what truth someone else receives. Mark's apology mattered because he did not use it to demand immediate forgiveness. Laura's answer mattered because she did not confuse understanding with absolution. Families often survive difficult truths not by agreeing on one clean version of the past, but by allowing more than one truth to remain visible. Evelyn was Laura's mother in every daily way that shaped a childhood. Hannah Avery was also her mother, even though Laura never got to know her. James Mercer was her father by birth, a man whose love was real and whose distance still carried consequences. None of those facts required Laura to erase another. At the open window, she finally understood that identity was not a prize hidden in the locked room. It was the right to know the whole history and decide for herself what each part meant. The cold air moved through the papers behind her. Laura left the window open and let the room breathe.